Afternoon, students. My name is Anthony Miller. I am an alumni of the program. I competed my senior year of high school as well. And since then, I've been working for the last 10 years as a coordinator, helping to organize the program in the state of Nevada, run the competitions, coach students and teachers, and help them prepare. And this is my first year getting to judge at the national level. So I'm really excited to hear what you guys have for us today. And thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. It's morning in Honolulu. I'm Susan Arnett. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, just retired from the public defender's office. I also teach at the University of Hawaii Law School, and I had the opportunity to judge some years back in person, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you virtually today.
As am I. My name's Andy Levy. I'm a trial lawyer in Baltimore, Maryland. And I also teach. Maryland has two law schools, and I teach at both the University of Maryland and the University of Baltimore.
Awesome. It's nice to get to know all of you. Good morning or afternoon. We are Irvington Unit 4. My name is Felicia Mo.
My name is Shami Talker.
My name is Ved Mystery.
And my name is Drishti Gupta, and thank you, judges and our coach, Mr. Martinez, for being here with us today. And we cannot wait to have this discussion with you on this beautiful day.
Thank you. I love your cheery spirits, all of you. Where is Irvington?
We're located in the Bay Area, so we are from Fremont. Yeah.
Okay, I'm familiar with the area. Spent some time there for work. Okay, wonderful. Well, I will go ahead and read the question that I'm sure you guys have heard plenty of times already, but for the recording, we'll read the question. And as soon as I'm done, you can begin at your own pace, and the timer will start when you begin your prepared remarks. Okay. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory powers? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may begin when ready.
While the Constitution says nothing about congressional investigations and oversight, James Madison argued in Federalist 51 that in, quote, framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself, unquote. The authority to conduct investigations is the inherent power of Congress, which possesses all legislative powers in order to control itself and check the other branches.
To determine how effectively Congress has used investigation and oversight, we must first answer the first sub-question. Oversight is the constant review of the activities of a federal agency or program. It is used to improve efficiency, evaluate performance, make budget appropriations, and advise policymaking. Investigation is the inspection of instances of poor administration, arbitrary behavior, abuse, and fraud. The intention is to use the obtained information to make legislation.
It is for this same reason we believe investigative power is the more significant power of Congress. In 1927, McGrain v. Doherty, Justice Van Devanter's majority opinion said that the power of inquiry, with process to enforce it, is essential to the legislative function. Congress must compel individuals to come to hearings using subpoenas, and witnesses can be held in contempt for defying those subpoenas. Attorney General Doherty's brother was held in contempt for refusing to appear before the Senate Investigation Committee on the Teapot Dome scandal. And in 1959, Darrenblatt v. West, which involved the extent of the Un-American Activities Commission's investigation power, Justice Harlan affirmed, the scope of the power of inquiry is as penetrating and far-reaching as the potential power to enact and appropriate under the Constitution.
Congress has also used its power to investigate effectively. It has formed select committees to inquire into events ranging from the conduct of the Civil War, the Teapot Dome scandal, and the Iran-Contra affair. For example, the Watergate Committee's investigation in 1974 exposed the wrongdoing at the White House and the Department of Justice and led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. Temporary committees like the 9/11 Commission investigated failures of the CIA and FBI and released reports recommending strategies in the war of terror. and the January 6th investigation has revealed major inefficiencies in the Defense Department and prevented preparations to address the riot.
In addition to investigation is Congress's power of oversight, which has also been effectively utilized throughout history. It was formalized in 1946 when Congress passed the Legislative Reorganization Act that required legislative committees to oversee agencies and increase the powers of the Government Accountability Office.
Later in 1971, televised hearings of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the Pentagon Papers solidified public opposition to continued U.S. participation in the Vietnam War, hastening the end of the conflict. Today, committees such as the Committee on Oversight and Reform host hearings analyzing past conduct, like accountability and lessons learned from the Trump administration's child separation policy, to make appropriate recommendations in the future. However, since 1995, the House experienced a large reduction of staff members, which hampered congressional committees. Oversight committees also began to receive more one-sided information during hearings as a result of political grandstanding that elevates partisanship.
Investigation and oversight have been the source and reasoning for many pieces of legislation passed by Congress. They are some of Congress's broadest powers, used hand in hand to support the legislative process. Thank you, and we're now open to any questions you may have.
Wonderful. So the Congress can conduct investigations in a number of different ways, and sometimes they mix and match and combine them in a single investigation. What do you think are some of the more effective ways and less effective ways that Congress can use their investigatory power?
I think one of the most effective ways that Congress can employ their investigatory power is to create a select committee, which has the sole purpose of investigating a certain event or a certain specific action of another group or branch in government, and whose goal is to specifically target the root cause of a certain issue and to learn more about it. Because I believe that select committees help fulfill the fundamental goal of an investigation, which is to provide Congress with information to pass better legislation.
An example of a select committee, and also in a sense a joint committee, was the 9/11 Commission that investigated the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In contrast to my colleague Ved's point about select committees being important, I also think that joint committees are very important forms of investigation because they tend to combine both the Senate and the House, have more committee members and more viewpoints, and kind of transition the partisanship that has happened between the two houses.
I do believe, however, we do have to recognize the importance of standing committees, which have a very specific focus on what topics they choose to, one, investigate and oversee. Standing committees, I think, play the most important role, if anything, on determining what needs to be investigated and how they would do so because of narrow focus, and that's essential.
On the flip side, we have seen a lot of these committees carry out investigations that may have not been the most effective in the best interest of Congress. For example, in the 1940s, a lot of these committees did carry out an investigation into game shows. They tried to uncover whether or not these game shows were corrupt and whether or not these game shows were rigged. And this investigation did not lead to any actual legislation. So we did see that Congress throughout history has used this investigatory power, probably not in the best interest of the people.
So is there any sort of unifying principle that you can draw from these various examples? Is there sort of a principle other than whether you happen to sort of support or oppose the particular politics involved that we can draw from what makes up an effective investigation versus one that is merely political grandstanding?
Yes.
What makes up? Oh, go ahead. Oh,
I think that the fundamental principle that we can look towards is the passing of legislation and the uncovering of information that helps lead to better legislation.
But that's I'm sorry, that's no standard at all, because that can be justified in virtually any investigation. Almost any investigation could lead to legislation.
Well, I'd like to look towards, for example, the House Un-American Committee investigations in the 1930s. That was an example of something that was strictly political because it was something that went after individuals as opposed to understanding acts of government to pass better legislation. And I think it was fundamentally the reason behind the investigation and what it ended up leading to, because that's an example of something that didn't actually lead to any better legislation.
And I'd actually like to cite a court case on that. The Supreme Court ruled in Gregory v. New Hampshire Attorney General on the Un-American Activities Commission, as well as Congress's investigating, the Communist Party and what de Gregory had to say about that. And because it was a past event and more historical, and you couldn't exactly legislate for future purposes, the court actually ruled that Congress does not have the investigative authority to conduct a further investigation into de Gregory.
Also, many select committees don't necessarily have the job of creating legislation. A lot of them do serve an advisory purpose. For example, the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming served an advisory role when they investigated the oil spills in the late 2000s, and that led to the 2009 stimulus package that helped energy efficiency. So they didn't necessarily create legislation, but they had an advisory purpose in helping the rest of Congress create legislation to support their findings.
So do they have more, do they have greater latitude in with their oversight function or their investigatory function?
When you say latitude, I'm assuming you're referring to a breadth of functions, in which case I would say their oversight function, because their oversight function is about looking at all the different aspects of what's going on in other branches, specifically oversighting the executive and understanding different roles that different bodies of government play to understand if they are functioning the way that was intended.
And specifically the Select Committee, we saw that oversight often leads to investigation, right? The Select Committee on energy efficiency had oversight over energy efficiency and global warming in general of the United States purposes, but it led to investigation after the oil spill. So they do have a greater breadth of oversight.
I do also think that oversight is a broader power in general for almost every single congressman and woman, because oversight can be conducted by minority members without much say for the leader of the committee, or two, just like the majority vote itself. So Maloney v. Murphy of 2020 established that 8 members of the House Oversight Committee, not a majority, are able to bring suit against the General Service Administration to comply with information requests, hence conducting oversight, which is not possible in terms of investigations, because that usually requires a majority.
I want to qualify though that although oversight is broad, we still believe that investigative power is the most significant, because that's what leads to a law being passed. That's what leads to legislation. So for instance, when the Congress investigated the Wall Street and they created the Securities Exchange Act out of that, all of those legislations were done because of investigation. So oversight is broad, but we still believe investigation was the most significant.
I have a question about investigatory work that doesn't appear to necessarily be something that would be followed by legislation one way or the other. I understand that there might be a need to find out what happened on 9/11 to prevent it from happening again, that sort of thing. But what about calling in all the tobacco companies to ask them what they knew and when they knew it about the danger of cigarette smoking, or calling in baseball players to talk about steroid use? How does that relate to Congress's work and a need for an investigation by Congress?
I think we do agree with the fact that those would be considered bad investigations. We've seen multiple times where Congress has been unable to, or has been very incorrect in carrying out investigations, and investigations have been a waste of time. And another example of that would be how the Republican-controlled House of Representatives in the 1990s delved into the misconduct of the Clinton administration in the Christmas party invitation list, where they just investigated for 140 hours why the Clinton administration was looking through the list and crossing names off. So I think for stuff like that, we do agree with you that Congress has been inefficient in that area and has carried out incorrect investigations.
On the other hand, I think all investigations have the intention of creating legislation, like the examples you mentioned. May I finish my thought?
Yes, please.
Like the examples you mentioned about baseball steroid use, we see right now the Biden administration is looking into it, in investigating the Environmental Protection Agency into how they had a decline in enforcement. Their intention is to create legislation, but there might not necessarily be legislation that will be created out of it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Congratulations. Okay, well, I think that you guys did really, really wonderfully today. I was very impressed with the number of examples you gave. You talked about a massive amount of different investigations, and you talked about ones that we hadn't even heard of yet today. You brought up the Gregory v. New Hampshire case, which was really wonderful. And I like your response to Susan's last question, basically saying, well, you know, those were bad investigations, but then the disagreement on, even if they don't end up coming up with legislation, if they are tied to a potential for creating legislation, perhaps we do the investigation and we realize that everything is just fine. And now we move on with our lives, and that's great. That's an adequate use of investigatory power, right? You don't only investigate because you don't want to investigate things with the determination that you're gonna find something wrong. If you don't find something wrong, you don't want to just find a way to make legislation for the sake of it, right? So I thought that was a good nuanced point. I do want to give you some constructive feedback here on really listening to the core of the question that's being asked and trying to respond directly to that. I think you did a great job on Susan's final question with that, but I think that there was I'm not sure if it was a struggle with communication or understanding, and perhaps we didn't communicate effectively what we were trying to get at with our questions, but I felt like I got a sense that you did this thing that I've seen from teams in the past where you had things that you knew about and you wanted to talk about, and you just kind of talked about those. I asked about the different manner of investigation and how effective different types of tools that the Congress has to conduct investigations, how effective they are. And you talked about the different types of committees. And while that was tangentially related, it wasn't exactly what I was talking about. I was trying to get more at the idea of, should they hire staff and expert witnesses to look into things and write reports, versus should they be pulling people into a public hearing in front of Congress where a bunch of Congress people are on camera yelling at them, right? And sometimes that's very effective, sometimes it's not. And with Watergate, they did an investigation, but they also already had a huge amount of research that came from the Washington Post, right? So I think, I'm not sure if you were struggling to understand what I was trying to get at, or if you were just trying to talk about the things that you know about, but I was a little bit disappointed there. And then I think the same thing sort of happened with Andrew's question. He asked about, are there any principles or guidelines for is it appropriate to do an investigation into something? And when you said, well, the passing of legislation, he said, you can make legislation about anything. Like you can argue that anything you want to investigate could lead to legislation. And you kind of still stuck on that. You still stuck on, well, here's a bunch of investigations. They led to legislation. They were effective. What we were trying to get at is there times when it's perhaps unconstitutional or abuse of the investigatory powers? And what the courts have determined there is that when you are using investigatory power to investigate the personal lives of individuals, that can be considered unconstitutional use of the power. There are things here that we were trying to look for, and I think that I don't want to blame you too much, but I just did want to give you some constructive feedback to really, if you don't think you know what we're trying to ask, I would much rather see you ask for clarification or ask us to better explain what the intent of the question was, rather than going on with the knowledge you have about something else. But I started this off by saying the examples you guys gave, the information you had was incredible, and I was very, very impressed with that. So I don't want the constructive criticism to overwhelm that. I think you guys did a very, very good job. I'm sure you're proud of yourselves. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I really liked your initial presentation a lot, because it really centered on the questions in a way that some teams haven't, that we've seen. Question number 2, you talked about both oversight and investigation. You made a distinction between them. You talked about select committees and standing committees. You talked about concrete examples of what has adversely affected the investigatory ability, particularly in recent years, the partisanship, staffing, that sort of thing. So I thought that was well thought out and well presented. On the questions, I liked that you had a position and you answered the question. You know, you didn't dodge it, and and then tried to back up what you were saying and characterized what you believed were good or bad. I thought it was very effective. I thought you did a really good job, and thank you very much. It was enjoyable to listen to.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, you come out of a we the people tradition in your state that is, you've got to be really, really good to make it out of your state competition. And it is, so we have, I always worry that I am applying a higher standard to, say, a California team than I might to sort of some other teams. Whether I am or not, you were up to the challenge. You certainly rose to it. You guys are well spoken. It's just like a well-oiled machine sometimes. I think the way you hand off, the way you sort of seem to be able to anticipate what the next person is going to cover, but similarly what the person who just spoke, just what the point they had made, is almost like you're mentally checking off boxes of points that need to be addressed. And only a team that is very well drilled, that works very hard, that has a firm foundation can do that. And I thought that, so I agree with Anthony. Ved, I think it was, I guess, Ved, I kind of jumped down your throat when you tried to give me a standard, and I said, that's no standard at all. But I don't know if it was you or one of your colleagues who came right back with the Gregory case and sort of said, well, in effect, Mr. Levy, you might not think much of the standard, but the Supreme Court has validated. You were whoever did that was much more tactful than that tone, but it was, was like an excellent debating point, and it was exactly the right answer. So, I'm impressed. I do think one of you put the House Un-American Activities hearings in the 30s rather than the 50s, but if so, that's a mistake anyone could make. I mean, that's quibbling. Did I get that wrong, or did I? But in any event, be that as it may, the reference to the game show hearings, to Vander's opinion, I don't think we've heard that. I don't think we've heard either of those examples yet today. So, great job. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your feedback.